Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Welcome to day 10 of patches 0.3.0 and the third edict. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the meta that's been developing in 0.3.0. There are Deadeyes everywhere, but just how many Deadeyes are there? And are there more of all of the other Ascendancies put together or not? Well, we'll take a look at that, but we're also going to break things down amongst the people that are not playing Deadeyes, as well as having a look at what those Deadeyes themselves happen to be playing. For all the things that Grinding Gear Games got right in 0.3.0, I think they've got the core game into the best state that it's ever been in. I think they've done a number of things that have made crafting very different to what it used to be. Quite a bit more powerful too, which you will see when we talk about unique items. But one thing they got really wrong with this is that Path of Exile 1, it took a long time to get to the level where you had what I would term reasonably good build diversity. You're not going to get perfect, but what you do get in Path of Exile 1 is that you almost never see a single build that is more than 20% of the meta. You also almost never see a single ascendancy that's more than 20% of the meta, except sometimes for things that are very, very good at a specific part of the game. So for instance, you might see in 3.26, Tricksters might be more than 20% of the meta just because they are so good late on. So they end up scaling more with gear than anything else, but they weren't oppressively good earlier on. Likewise, Berserkers were incredibly good at days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of patch 3.26 over in Path of Exile 1 land, but they haven't been oppressively good since. Instead, they were just recognized as the best way to get started, and then you rolled something else that was a bit different. Well, in Path of Exile 2, things are a little bit different. The POE1 took a lot of buff and nerf cycles in order to get to that point where every Ascendancy feels reasonably playable, with the exception of the Assassin, but at least they got 18 that are feeling reasonably good. Path of Exile 2 is not there yet. Path of Exile 2 needs a lot more buff and nerf cycles. And given that at the moment we seem to only be getting one of those a patch, that's not likely to be fixed for something like 12 months, maybe even 24. It's going to show here, it's only a slight exaggeration to say that there is no build diversity, Deadeye has killed it, but we'll have a look at what the numbers say. A quick note on methodology, I'm looking at public characters that are aggregated on the website POE.Ninja. This is basically everyone that doesn't opt out, and it comes to POE Ninja's attention either by ever being one of the highest 1,000 characters by XP, i.e. getting on the ladder, or alternately by being a frequent trader, or alternatively by actively opting in on the POE Ninja website. Now this gets a lot of people, especially once you start talking about the very, very, very highest level players. I also felt like mentioning that I'm going to be talking about level 90 and above characters here unless I specify otherwise. The reason for that is that by level 90, people have stuck with a character for quite a while. It's not that rare for people to start a character, get to maybe level 82 and decide, yeah, this is definitely not for me. But to get to 90, you need to be pretty committed to the character. And as a result, it gets rid of some of the sort of complete and utter meme builds that you see, as well as things that just haven't had a lot of thought put into them. In Path of Exile 1, I tend to use higher numbers than 90, and that's because over in Path of Exile 1, it's a lot easier to get to the high 90s than it is in Path of Exile 2. Also, we're talking about softcore and trade enabled here. I think the SSF numbers are quite a bit down this league. I'm not 100% certain of that, but trade got a whole bunch of extra new tools this league. As a result, you've got that hardcore of people that are always going to say, I'm playing SSF no matter what. Well, they're playing SSF, but the people that play SSF sometimes, trade sometimes, most of them seem to be playing over in trade. We could look at hardcore as well, but I feel like that would be a very different video to this. But I am doing one thing very differently to previous videos. The first division that a lot of people use when they're talking about the meta in Path of Exile 1, that's what I've used so far in Path of Exile 2, has been Ascendancy class. In Path of Exile 2 though, I think that because of the way that skills correlate to weapon types, I'm actually going to start splitting by weapon type first, or at least I'm experimenting with that here. If you think that it doesn't work, definitely let me know down in the comments below, and then I can potentially go back to going through the Ascendancies split first instead, but I'm just aware that once we get to 36 Ascendancies at some point, then from then onwards, that's going to be very unwieldy. The reason I do this though, is that I think that a Spear Deadeye plays more like a Spear Amazon than it does like a Bow Deadeye. And for that reason, I'm considering the Spear Deadeye and the Spear Amazon to sort of be variants of the same build, whereas the Bow Deadeye is just a completely different build altogether to both of them. So we're going to do both of these. We're going to take a look first at the Ascendancy split, and after that we're going to do a deeper dive into all of the weapon types. Now, there is a saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So here is my 1,000-word essay on why the Deadeye is oppressively good at the moment. The innermost ring of this donut chart is the Ascendancy popularity at level 85. Each time you go out, you jump up a few levels. 85, then 90, then 95, then 97. What you'll see here is that there is a plurality but not a majority of Deadeyes at level 85. A larger plurality, but still not a majority, at level 90. But then once we start looking at 95, we're looking at a majority. That is more Deadeyes than every other Ascendancy put together. When we get to 97, it's the same thing. It's just the same thing, but worse. There are even more Deadeyes when we get there. So what we're seeing here is two effects at once. Firstly, we have a popularity contest. Deadeye is winning the popularity contest. That doesn't prove that it's too good. What that proves is that people believe it's really good. However, once you get to that point that you're level 85, you are more likely to be successful if you're playing Deadeye than any other Ascendancy that's out there. So we're finding that there is this conventional wisdom that's going around that the Deadeye is the best Ascendancy, and then that conventional wisdom is being proven absolutely correct by the performance of players that league start with a Deadeye. Deadeye is the most popular, and it's popular for a reason. It's popular because it is better than the other choices. There's a couple other ones that aren't very popular that are doing very well. It's worth noting that the Ritualist, for instance, there's not that many people getting it to level 90. But once you get to level 90, it's actually top tier for getting from 90 to 97. Deadeye eclipses it from getting from 85 to 97. But once you do get to 90, Ritualist is actually the top one for getting to 97 from there. But it's definitely the case that making the decision to go Deadeye is probably the single biggest thing you can do to improve your league start if you're about to get started. It is that much better than every other option that's available. So here's a little bit of a fun fact for you. If we split up Deadeye Bow into one Ascendancy and Deadeye Non-Bow into another Ascendancy, the Deadeye Non-Bow Ascendancy will be the 5th most used Ascendancy, and it will be miles ahead of number 6. That's for level 90 characters at least. 86% of Deadeyes use bows, 7% use crossbows, 3% use spears, and there are a few other things that are getting used as well there. You'll notice a lot of these things don't add up to 100%. That's because I tend to leave out things that are 1% or 1/3 of 1%, and those things do add up, especially when there's a lot of them. The other major issue though is we didn't know just how bad the support gems would be for non-attack builds compared to what was available for attack builds on release day. So those people that went in thinking, oh yeah, Deadeye, that'll be a safe league starter, they found out that Elemental Armaments 2 was an awesome support gem. They found out that Rapid Attacks 2 was an awesome support gem. 67% of all builds use the former, 61% of all builds use the latter. These numbers are just miles ahead of comparable non-attack supports. Things that do the same thing, like Rapid Casting 2, I think it's called, the faster casting in Path of Exile 2. This is 20%, whereas Rapid Attacks 2 is 25%. Elemental Armaments 2 gives a big more multiplier to damage, but it does so without some of the conditions that you'll find on various support gems that are available for casters. This information wasn't available prior to release. I think another thing that's happened here is a number of people may have started a caster and then either rolled over to a Deadeye, which is definitely going to be my second character, or alternately, they have quit the league entirely, whereas the Deadeyes are still playing. So when one class is oppressively good, sometimes you can even see a convergence on it that goes beyond what that class actually deserves. Let's quickly mention some other common setups by Ascendancy first, because it's not just Deadeyes in the game. We talked about the Deadeyes mostly using bows, but also occasionally using other things. Blood Mage is a number 2 Ascendancy, mostly using a wand and a focus, occasionally using a staff, but staves in POE2 seem to be weaker. And when I say a staff, I'm talking about two-handed caster weapons here. I'm not talking about quarterstaves, the attack-based ones. Now this is the same for Stormweavers, and the same for the Abyssal Lich. The Abyssal Lich being the new sort of semi-hidden Ascendancy that's available in 030. Invokers are split between Unarmed and Quarterstaff, and in fact when we get to the weapons, we're going to be bundling those two together because they use the same skills. Liches vary a lot. Now they're 48% using wands, but just because a plurality, almost majority use wands, doesn't mean that there's not a lot of other variants beyond that, and so Liches, they're kind of their own thing. Infernalists are almost all minion builds, so they're using a Scepter. A little bit of difference in the offhands. Sometimes they use a focus. Sometimes they even use a traditional shield. There's no real consistency there. When it comes to mercenaries, they are primarily using crossbows. Now I say primarily using crossbows, but let's just be a little bit more precise on that. Tacticians are mostly using crossbows, witch hunters and gemling legionnaires are overwhelmingly using crossbows. And then we have the Amazon. The Amazon is actually surprisingly mostly using bows. We'll associate the Amazon Ascendancy with the spear because of how oppressively good that combination was in 0-2-0, but that's no longer the case. And now Amazons are primarily using bows, but they will use spears as well. And when we go through some of the weapon class setups and what ascendancies they're being used with, you will see that the Amazon and the spear do still go well together. It's just that they go slightly better with bows because bows are just stronger. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the less played ascendancies because there's a fair jump down. When you go from Amazon to the next most played ascendancy, that's quite a jump. And so I think this is a good spot to cut it out. Otherwise, we start talking about really unpopular ascendancies like the Acolyte of Chayula. It's going to feel a bit weird because some of the really esoteric combinations like Deadeye with a spear, they end up being more popular than Acolyte of Chayula no matter what weapon you consider. One last thing I want to touch on before we break down into all the different weapon types. There has been a big loser in this patch, and it's been as a result of the new crafting. What's gone on here is that new options replace old options. Crafting getting so much better in 0-3-0 has pushed a lot of unique items away from use this for a long time until you get something better status, down into dumpster tier status. Chaos inoculation use is also down, and the reason for that is that it's now easier to craft chaos resistance on gear. And once you've got chaos resistance, chaos inoculation doesn't feel beneficial anymore, tends to feel detrimental. So that's the reason that CI use is down so far, and I expect that will be more the case later on. Now, unique items in slots that can accept a rare item, these are down in use by a massive amount. Only a couple of items are actually worse than they were in 0-2-0. Many items are actually better, but mostly it's just that they've been completely replaced by new options. And probably the most fun fact of all, Ascendancies. Once the pinnacle chase item in Path of Exile 2, it now costs fewer Exalted Orbs to trade into an Ascendancies than the number of Divine Orbs it cost at various points last league if you wanted to trade into an Ascendancies. Now, Ascendancies has become much more common, so it's not like this is something that's completely unexpected, but at the same time, it is still a very rare item. It's just that basically no one wants it, and the reason for that is it's now much easier to craft a +3 amulet that has other good mods on it. In fact, I have a video in the works on crafting a particular type of +3 amulet, which is going to be a Magic Find caster oriented one. And it's something that is not completely a budget craft. It's definitely not something inaccessible at current prices. So let's take a look at the meta, starting with bow builds. These are 42.5% of the meta. Now, 91% of these people are playing on a Deadeye, 4% on an Amazon, 2% on a Pathfinder, and 1% of them are playing a Blood Mage. Now, the Blood Mage here is a complete curveball. This is based around the unique bow Widowhail. This is something that can be used alongside a perfectly crafted quiver in order to do some really disgustingly good things in conjunction with the spell Spark, or really any other projectile spell. You can get a lot of gem levels out of this, and you can do so with projectile speed, which is a really important stat as well. So this is actually fundamentally a spell build. So if we exclude those, and we only talk about the people that actually make attacks with bows, well, that's the other 99% of the bow builds. The other 42% of the meta, while 0.5% are playing on this Blood Mage setup. And once more, 91%, 4%, 2%, 1%, that doesn't add up to 100%. That's because of rounding and because I'm not counting all the other ascendancies, which do add up to a little bit, but none of them are significant. Going back to the bows, people have heavy investment in evasion and moderate investment into deflection here usually. Sometimes people also pick up some energy shield as well, but their primary defensive layer is evasion in general. Next we have the wand builds. These are 18.8% of the meta, generally speaking elemental casters, and 51% of them are Blood Mages. Blood Mage got a couple of buffs in this patch. Whilst there was a nerf associated with it as well, taken as an entire package, it was a pretty big buff. 17% of people are on the Lich, 16% the Stormweaver, 10% the Abyssal Lich, 2% Chronomancer, 2% Infernalist. Now, lightning spell skills in general are the most common here. Orb of Storms, setting up Arc and Spark, both as payoffs. But there's other setups as well. Chaos spells that are used on different builds. There's also a fire setup that uses Fireball, Ember Fusillade, and Frostbomb. There's also a bunch of other things that you can do. I've been messing around with something that is completely hipster, where I'm using Elemental Equilibrium and Firestorm, but this is not something that is really strong. In fact, this is something that's quite weak, and that I'm looking to roll something else in its place at some point. Now, among these wand builds, most people are mostly scaling Energy Shield as their defense, and not really bothering with either armor or evasion rating. There's definitely some individuals that do, but overall, the numbers say it's ES only. Crossbows come up next. Now, these are 11.2% of the meta, and the thing that made a huge splash here was the new gem, Mortar Cannon. 49% of people who are playing crossbow builds are using Mortar Cannon in their build in order to automate the firing of grenades. Now, 29% of these people are playing on the Deadeye, of all things. They certainly will keep showing up everywhere because it is the best ascendancy in the game, and it is not close. After that, we have 25% Tacticians, 21% Witch Hunters, 6% Warbringer, 3% Gemling Legionnaire, and there is also one specific build on the Lich. Now, this is the Liches that are using the Last Lament unique crossbow. Pretty much no one else wants that item, but those Lich crossbow builds, they are definitely using it, and they're using it well. After that, we have the Staff and Unarmed builds. Now, I'm combining these because it just feels right. They're the same class of skills. Ultimately, if you wanted to split them up, you can do that as well. It's about a 50-50 split between the two. So these are 10.3% of the meta when combined. Of these, 75% are Evokers, 8% are Deadeyes, again, the Deadeye showing up again. Acolyte Chaeula is 5%, Amazon 3%, and then there's just a bunch of dregs after that. Now, defensively, these builds have a very common defensive core, and that is get 2,000 energy shield, get 6,000 evasion. That's your starting point. Once you've got that, invest in both of them further and keep improving your character. But that seems to be the point where this build starts to go from feeling a bit squishy to starting to sing a little bit more. Scepter builds come next, not to be confused with Spectre builds, and here we have all the minion setups. 6.7% of the meta are using a Scepter as their primary weapon. Now, the reason I specify primary here is that it is possible to use a Scepter in the same way that you would otherwise use a shield. So you're playing a build that's using a spear as its primary weapon, then in your offhand, use a Scepter, and you get the spirit from that Scepter. You don't do any investment into minions, but that's there because you think you'll get more benefit on your character from that spirit than you would from a shield. Well, you can do that, but I'm not counting those people. I'm only counting the people that use a Scepter in conjunction with things that are not otherwise weapons. 46% of these minion players are Infernalists, 30% Liches, 8% Ritualists, 3% Blood Mages, 3% Invokers. Now, of these builds, Skeletal Storm Mage is the most popular of these, but there's quite a lot of variety. So Skeletal Storm Mage just comes a little bit ahead of all the other things. The one thing I would say is one of the biggest constants though, Pain Offering is extremely popular on these setups. Other than that though, there is a lot of variety. You can make a lot of different setups work. Now, people are spending some of their spirit quite often on other reservations. We are seeing Convalescence, for instance, being used. It's not used by a majority, but it is used by a sizable chunk. However, Grim Feast, its prospects are looking pretty grim. No one wants to use it. No one cares that it was reworked. It is basically a dead gem at the moment. After that, we have the Spear builds. These were everywhere in 0.2.0, and they're slightly less everywhere now, down at 5.7%. Of these, we have 33% of people playing Deadeyes. 32% are playing Blood Mages that aren't really mages. More on them later. 17% Amazon, 6% Ritualist, 5% Warbringer. Now, this Blood Mage build, this is not a spell build like some of the earlier spellcasters using bows that we were talking about. This is a true spear build, and it uses Bleed, Crit, and Tangle Tongue as its weapon. Tangle Tongue got nerfed a lot in 0.3.0, but it is still fine. This is actually a majority of the bleed builds that are in the league. Greater than 60% of all users of the support gem Deep Cuts 2 are playing this setup, this particular Blood Mage, Bleed, Crit, Tangle Tongue setup. There's otherwise not much consistency among the spear builds, lots of different things going on, and the one thing that is a constant, they're all using a Herald, but beyond that, they're using all sorts of different things. Now, it's worth noting that these numbers might actually be a little bit inflated, and it might not have been 5.7%. The reason I say this is that there was an emergency patched bug that made these builds way stronger than they were intended to be. So these were able to zip around maps at crazy, crazy fast speeds, and that ended up getting nerfed. That was something that was primarily affecting the Deadeyes here, so it wouldn't surprise me if some of these characters were originally Whirling/Deadeyes, and they haven't yet respec'd into a Deadeye that is a bit stronger after those changes. So if that hadn't happened, we might see a smaller number of spear builds than we do. And after this, we have the least popular playstyle of all. Sorry, those of you that just love the idea of donking enemies on the head with a slow, two-handed, massive weapon, you're not very popular this league. 2.8% of the player base, 44% of you on Titans, 31% on Warbringers, 8% on Smith of Katava, which took a massive nerf to its setup, and then 5% on Tactician. This playstyle is simultaneously pretty unpopular because it involves very, very slow attacks, and it's not good enough to pull people who are chasing power, who will play whatever's the strongest, into it. And as a result, it's just not all that popular. Heralds do help the playstyle out a lot, but not by enough. And most of the people that might like the power fantasy involved end up choosing something different instead. And that is the end of the first meta wrap-up for 0.3.0. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlobs have interesting results.